When I was a tween and teen in the 90s, I abhorred gym class. The thought of joining an organized sports league after school was unimaginable. And to be clear, it was not that I was not athletic. I spent almost all of my free time with a small group of friends skateboarding. And this was before skateboarding was fully accepted into the mainstream. There was a whole genre of videos that we would watch of teenage skateboarders getting yelled at by adults for skateboarding at businesses and in the streets. And if you know, this would go on to launch the careers of Bam Margera and all of the jackass people. Many adults at the time would extol to us the value of organized sports. They would tell us it would teach us necessary values like perseverance in the face of adversity and teamwork. They would tell us it was not about winning or losing, but doing your best and showing up for your team. Now, if you can remember being a tween, or if you have tweens in your life, you will know that appeals to abstract values rarely win the day. We chose skateboarding because it was fun and it felt free. We did not have a coach, we didn't have opposing teams. We did not have schedules or prescribed rules. We just had our board and our imagination. We had our friends. And the best part of skateboarding was that anyone was invited. You didn't have to be good. One person's skill did not threaten another person's standing. Much like how I hear folks describe climbing today, it was a sport where my excellence didn't threaten or had no bearing on your excellence. This opened the doors to play. And the case for organized sports was not made better as we moved into high school. Organized sports were separated by gender, they were exclusive and competitive, and they were serious. Parents and teachers would tell us that sports were an important part of a balanced education that colleges like to see. The school forced us to show up to pep rallies for this, that, or the other sports team, and rumors of talent scouts in the crowd were often in the air. Sports was serious business in the way that nothing else that was similarly positioned was. For instance, we had a fairly robust after-school theater program, and many of the actors and backstage techies were hopeful to make that their careers. But there was also a rule that the school did large ensemble plays, and they gave roles to every person who wanted to join, regardless of their ability. Even if only small roles, even if they had to make up new roles. Now, I was a terrible dancer, but even I was still cast in a made-up role of Greaser number 2 and was made a backup dancer in the production of Grease. Many of you, I am sure, have felt the sting of exclusion from sports, whether it be not making the cut for the baseball team or that the only sport that was allowed to women was softball when all you really wanted to play was baseball, or that you were never even offered the chance because of your perceived ability. Organized sports were serious business, and us skateboarders were anything but. Now, I have long since abandoned my teenage angsty sullenness around organized sports. I think that this might be perhaps because no adults are pressuring me to join any league. I enjoy watching basketball, both women's and men's, and I find myself curious about professional wrestling. And yeah, I know it's scripted, but it just looks so glitzy. As a tween, we would complain that sports were like a religion, and we didn't mean that in a good way. But I don't think that we were too far off the mark. That said, my relationship to religion has obviously changed since then. Sports and religion seem to share a lot of similarities, be it the fervor with which its believers engaged and or the strictures that we felt it imposed. It was not uncommon for us to describe ourselves as spiritual, but not religious, as teenagers, because we associated organized religion with evangelizing, purity culture, and honestly, war. And today, there are many theorists who consider sports to have always been and continue to be something that they call a civic religion, and I'll explain. So the ancient Greek Olympics were religious ceremonies, and the gladiator games were originally rites of death, and Aztec sports were always dedicated to their gods. And I think the religious nature of sports continues today, but in the form that instills the sense of national identity rather than a deity. Sports are shot through with religious language, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that we more often talk about miracles and salvation and even prayers in relation to sports than in any other place of our lives. The poem in our reading today played with the parallels between the language of sports talk and God talk. Many folks will remember where they were when particularly important sporting events happened, like where they were when Cleveland rebounded from the 3-1 deficit to win its first major sports final in 50 years, or maybe where they were when the Red Sox finally won the World Series. And in most election years, there are more viewers of the Super Bowl than there are people who vote. We do sacred rituals or have superstitions around sports, and in our day-to-day lives, we are more likely to encounter sporting events as a topic of casual small talk than almost any other topic, save maybe the weather. And the fascinating thing about sports when we see it as a civic religion is that we can also then see that sports serve a civic purpose that is often unnoticed by fans and the casual viewer alike. See, sports are an appropriate topic of conversation because unlike so many others, they are seeming innocuous. And some may even say non-political. You know the famous adage, never talk about politics or religion in polite company. Well, that excludes sports because it's not overtly political or spiritual in nature, which is also what makes it the perfect medium for instantiating a status quo that seems natural or non-controversial. Unless, that is, you are someone who is excluded from this civic religion. For instance, the singing of the national anthem is seen as a non-political thing at a sporting event until a player takes a knee to protest police violence. The national anthem, an overtly political message celebrating and establishing the political rule, is seen as non-political, but the taking of a knee is seen as inappropriately interrupting the so-called non-political of sports with politics. Sports stars wearing Black Lives Matter shirts and Pride nights for hockey teams seem like an eruption of the political in the middle of a non-political sphere of sports. And I think it feels like a disruption not because sports are merely entertainment, but because their underlying nature is to normalize a particular form of national identity that is challenged by these actions and symbols. Exclusion from sports is, in a sense, being removed from the most symbolically potent instantiation of Americanness. The fact that up to 6.8% of Americans identify as LGBTQIA and that only one player in the history of football has been openly gay tells us a bit about the nature of the civic religion around football, because it implies either that there are many folks who feel they have to be closeted about their sexuality, or because queer folks are being excluded from playing. We know that exclusion from sports has historically been hand in hand with exclusion from other areas of American life, like the exclusion of Black people or the exclusion of women from professional arenas. And we know that racism is alive in sports today, and we know that only now are we beginning to see any real investment in women's sports. But we also know that that investment is still woefully inadequate. And today, the exclusion of trans people from sports is a central prong in the fight of legislating trans people out of existence. It had started with hand-wringing about the danger of people assigned male at birth posing toward cis women in a contact sport. Now, of course, this ignores the fact that all people, cis women included, are endowed with different genetics that can make them taller or stronger or faster than their counterpart. Then the fear came that people assigned male at birth were taking scholarship opportunities away from deserving cis women, despite any evidence. In fact, in a recent study, scientists found evidence that trans women may in fact have a slight disadvantage in many sports. And this also ignores the many sports in which cis women are consistently better than cis men, like archery. And more recently, this debate has spread to such sporting events as darts, chess, and video games. Obviously, I think this is where transphobia tips its hand. You, like me, are probably asking what possible advantage someone has assigned male at birth in chess. It may even make us question why there are different leagues for these games. What I think that this shows, though, is how much this dialogue about restricting trans people from sports is actually about restricting them from accessing, engaging with, and being part of a civic life. And to be clear, I'm not blaming sports themselves for these exclusionary practices. There is nothing inherently exclusionary about basketball. The games themselves are just that. They're games. They are play. Just like my tween suspicion of organized religion came from this overly broad brushstroke about what religious life might be and how we might find religious homes outside of the strictures of particular forms of Christianity that we were aware of, my suspicion of sports was an awareness of something real, and it was an overly broad brushstroke. Because at its heart, basketball is a game. It is fun. And in itself, it can teach values like integrity and perseverance and teamwork and care. But I think to get into contact with these elements of the game, it requires us to have a fundamental shift in how we approach sports. I think it's important to center the notion of play at the heart of sports. Part of building friendships, part of engaging civic life is playing with each other. Whether that be in physical sports, that be in board games, wordplay, or a well-timed joke, play is a huge part of finding and locating meaning. It's generative. I sometimes think of these big moments in basketball and marvel at how these came about because of people inventing new ways to play, creating the game in the bounds of the rules which coordinate the game. Imagine if we thought about sports from a values-first perspective, and I will say that there are a bunch of great queer sports leagues doing this very thing now, and some professional players are also leading that charge. The famous soccer player Megan Rapinoe is an outspoken advocate for women's rights and transgender people's rights. And talking about all of the legislation around trans kids' rights to play their sport as their gender identity, Rapinoe says, quote, "We as a country are trying to legislate away people's full humanity. It's particularly frustrating when women's sports is weaponized. Oh, now we care about fairness? Now we care about women's sports? That's total BS." She goes on, "The most amazing thing about sports is that you play, and you're playing with one another, and you're having fun, and you're being physically active." She says, "We're putting this all through the lens of competition and winning. But we're talking about people's lives. That's where we have to start." So perhaps what I'm trying to say is if sports is a civic religion, then shouldn't we be trying to UU sports? Shouldn't sports be a vector of our values? Imagine how different high school sports would be if we did not focus on them as a means to an end. It was not the potential for scholarships or the talent scouts or the winning, but it was a means to help each and every child learn how to use their bodies in creative ways, how to develop friendships and values and persistence and determination. I also think that sports can help inform our UU-ness. Centering play and amusement in our faith does not take away from the seriousness of the mission, but it can call us to the best parts of ourselves. Because what is being a UU other than being able to play with your thoughts and feelings, not weighed down by the necessities imposed by a creed or a single text? What is being a UU if not working cooperatively and inclusively, attending to equity and democracy, and learning persistence in the face of great odds? I think that for us, the right to play is as fundamental as the right to pray. Now, our opening words in the Tao tell us to compete in the spirit of play, like children. So let us be a religion that holds play as a central tenet, a play so large that it knits us all together. May it be so. Amen.
Hi, welcome to Fourth Use Getting the Message. My name is Kerwin Seeger. I use he, they pronouns, and I am here to chat about the sermon that you just heard. I am with Lily.
Hi, I'm Lily Carayannis. I go by she, her pronouns. And I'm an aspirant to UU ministry, so still along the path. Will probably be a little bit of a long path for me, but working slowly towards there. I'm just so happy to be here today.
Yes, so we're happy to have you. We're excited about your sermon. So I'm very excited about your sermon because I am an adult that did not grow up playing sports, but found sports later in life. And I really enjoyed that, like, sports as community, and I've really seen that as, like, kind of the community building and that same aspect that I also see at 4th U. Can you talk a little bit about that message of community and how sports have kind of gotten into civic world as a type of religion almost?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what you shared there about maybe finding sports later in life, I don't think it's uncommon for many queer folks to maybe when they were younger not feel entirely included in the world of sports and sporting events, and later in life when we're more ourselves, we're more able to be our full selves, and we can find more communities like that gather around sports in that way. And so I think that whether it's through playing with a team, not even like professionally, just playing with your leagues and doing something for like the pure enjoyment of it, or just being a spectator and gathering with other people and all collectively holding your breath as you wait for the final shot or whatever.
So that actually brings up some really good points. It's not just about participating in the sport. I know not everyone enjoys that, like, large level physical activity. Some people, their physical activity is other things that are more individualized, but everyone has a role to play in a sports group, and whether it's a fan or a participant or even an officiant. Do you think that there is opportunity for us to look at those roles in sports and apply them to different aspects of our life?
Yeah, I think that it may not necessarily, always graft on like a perfect like one-to-one correspondence, but I think anybody who's gotten really into a sport will start to like see things or think of things in that way and be like, oh, well, they're kind of like, the point guard of my office meeting or something, and like it's something that like makes sense to you in the internal symbolic logic of a game that you play. I think this happens with a lot of things. I'm actually happen to be looking at a Dungeons and Dragons emblem right now, and I'm thinking, I mean, when you play enough Dungeons and Dragons, you start having these metaphors in life for this stuff. And I think the thing that connects them all, though, is that sense of play. It's a sense of like we're doing something to amuse ourselves. We're doing something purely for the experience of connecting with each other in a way that isn't so serious and isn't so consequential, but can really feel consequential when you're in the middle of it.
I love that. I love that. And shout out to our 4th U Dungeons and Dragons youth group.
Woo!
So speaking of centering play, there's been a lot of talk about very exclusionary language in sports as of late. I think that, we've seen political figures really make women's sports and the exclusion of non-cis women from women's sports or other conversations that we've had. How do we center play in a time when there is so much hate surrounding members of our community that are inherently more vulnerable because of the identities that they hold?
Yeah, that's what really, I'm happy you asked that, because that's what really started me on thinking of this. And then I kind of like worked backward as to what was so important about sports and why is this effort to exclude specifically trans women, but also trans men and also women in general in sports. And one of the things that I was inspired by was an article, I believe it was in the New Yorker, about a trans man who kind of in the 1920s came out as a trans man after having won some medals in Olympic running. And it follows a saga of actually a lot of really positive press around this person and a lot of excitement for them and a lot of generally like positivity until the 1930s when a Nazi doctor picked up what was going on and put pressure on the Olympics to exclude trans people from the Olympics. And that kind of took me to this place of like, I think maybe flipping your question on its head and saying like, why is play so important and so necessary? And why is centering inclusion so important and so necessary at a time where there is so much hate and so many attempts to exclude people from our civic religions of sports?
It's amazing. Yeah, it's a very dynamic and lots to unpack, and I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and give us a little bit more insight into our sermon today. And it was great to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Kerwin. I really enjoy being here at 4th U.
All right. Thanks, y'all.